Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 905 for October 27th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
It is an interesting point in a distillery when you get to this place where you release something that's 100% yours, because there is no hiding. There is no blending away what may or may not have been a flaw or something you were still figuring out back 5 years ago, right? And so there is a bit of vulnerability, some nakedness there, and you just lay that out there and you say, this is who we were, this is who we are, and enjoy it or don't, but we're very proud of it.
Northern California's Sonoma County is known for its wines, but there's a lot of whiskey being made there as well. This month, Redwood Empire Distillery is releasing its first bottled in bond whiskeys, a bourbon and a rye. It's an offshoot of a growing wine business in the region. I'll chat with distillers Jeff Duckhorn and Lauren Patz later on WhiskyCast In-Depth, along with CEO Aaron Webb. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
Well, anytime you have anything that involves the union and corporate, there can possibly be those times where you're like a dysfunctional family.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
What do Japan and Scotland have in common? You guessed it, whiskey. That's why Dewar's brought these two cultures together in our newest cask series innovation. Introducing Dewar's 8-year Japanese Smooth. We took the Dewar's you know and love and finished it in rare Mizunara oak casks for a complex and balanced Scotch whiskey like no other.
Let's get started with the news. Heaven Hill workers in Bardstown, Kentucky will be back on the job Thursday after reaching a new 5-year contract agreement with the company. That deal ends the 6-week-long strike that began on September 11th after United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 23D members rejected the company's final contract offer. The agreement came suddenly, just 3 days after Heaven Hill declared an impasse and announced plans to start hiring replacement workers. I talked with Local 23D President Matt Aubrey Sunday after the ratification vote. This is an edited part of our interview.
Late Wednesday night, I received a call from the federal mediator saying he wanted to have an emergency meeting that following Thursday with the company. So we went in there with the mindset of thinking that when we go in Thursday morning, they're going to show us the process of them trying to implement an impasse. That was where our thought process was. But we were still willing to negotiate and do good faith bargaining. So after actually the meeting lasted for about 12 and a half hours, there was the movement, and then there was at the end of the meeting, there was a fully recommended tentative agreement to take to the members. So we had an information meeting yesterday afternoon, revised everything with the membership, let them know what changes were made, and then that led to a ratification contract vote, and the majority of the votes were yes.
How big was the majority, given that the strike vote was 96% in favor of a strike 6 weeks ago?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I do believe that compared to the no votes, there was probably 50 members, 45, 50 more members that voted yes on it.
So there was a split among your membership then?
Yes, there was a split.
How did you resolve the issue that Heaven Hill wanted to be able to go to 7-day production with weekend shifts? How did you guys work that out?
Well, actually, our proposal that we put together with the union to give to the company, actually, Heaven Hill kind of bit themselves because Max Shapira sent out letters to all the workers about the traditional, non-traditional language. His personal letter had more info and more concrete language than the proposal that the company was trying to come back to the union. So once we explained that to the members, I think they realized that they are at safe haven, that they are executed from the non-traditional. There is language in there now that states that they will absolutely not, unless volunteered or taken a rated position, be forced onto that non-traditional. But with all the interviews the company has done, all the, I guess, the flashes of social media, and with those letters, we kind of have that in our back pocket for future reference, just in case, because that's a clear arbitration trial if they try to attempt to do anything of that matter of making anyone go to that non-traditional.
But will there be weekend shifts, say, for new hires? Does the company have that flexibility?
They do have the flexibility. They do. The non-traditional will go strictly to new hires. Unless the only way someone from a traditional that's on it now can go to non-traditional is if they volunteer, want to go to non, or if there's a rated position open and they sign that rated bid and they're offered it due to their seniority.
Okay, this is going to be a tough question, but I've got to ask it. I know that the union's goal in past negotiations, and I'm thinking especially of the Four Roses strike a couple of years ago, was making sure that you protect the next generation of workers. And
Definitely.
It seems like in this case, new hires are going to be starting on the weekends, or at least be subject to weekend shifts. Is that counter to the goal of protecting the future employees?
Definitely. You always want to protect your newborns that are coming in, years after years after years after us. With the non-traditional, say I don't work at Heaven Hill at all, and I enjoy being off during the week, and I see they have a job opening that's going to be just strictly weekend work, and that's the type of work I like to do, then I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm aware of what days I'm going to be working, what days I'm going to be off.
How do you resolve the differences and the tension that's built up over the last 6 weeks between going to court at least once or twice, the NLRB complaint over the impasse, the social media pressure that's been placed on the company? How do you guys get past that and get back to a decent relationship?
Well, anytime you have anything that involves the union and corporate, there can possibly be those times where you're like a dysfunctional family. You know, there's times where you're not going to agree with everything. You're not going to see eye to eye. But there's always light at the end of the tunnel. The local union in Heaven Hill before this had always had a great relationship. We've always worked well together. This was just the last few weeks was just one of those situations that we just didn't see eye to eye. We just didn't agree on things. I do believe as time goes, I do believe that relationship can be healed. I mean, right now it's got a big bandage on it. It's cut pretty deep, but wounds always heal. I do believe after some time that, hopefully the relationship can get better and back on track.
What do you say to the members of the public that had started in the last week or two calling for a boycott of the products your members make at Heaven Hill in support of your union now that this is all settled?
We greatly, deeply appreciate everyone's support. All the boycotting, all the refusing of, selling their product, buying their product, drinking their product. I'm on social media, but I don't get too involved. When I I don't read comments and stuff, but, I'll get screenshots from people I know with people stating that they'll never ever drink Heaven Hill again. They'll never ever touch another brand of Heaven Hill by the way they've done the workers. So I do believe Heaven Hill does have a scar on their name. I do think it's going to take a long time, even if it ever does, to be honest, to ever heal. I mean, I think people are always going to remember this moment. And it's like I spoke to the members. I said, guys, at the end of the day, you all made history. A 96.1 strike vote in the distillery division, that's unheard of. I mean, you guys made history, and this is something that when it comes to the union, people are always going to remember this. It's something that I don't think will ever go away.
Remember that Matt Aubrey acknowledged his members were split on whether to accept the new contract. Louisville television station Wave 3 reports some local 23D members are upset with their union for ending the strike too early, and that many of those who voted for the deal did it because they were afraid of being replaced. One other note, while the contract was ratified last Saturday, workers are returning Thursday in order to allow time for all of them to go through rapid COVID-19 tests and for a complete cleaning of the Heaven Hill Bardstown facilities. In other news, the founders of Horse Soldier Bourbon have broken ground on Kentucky's latest distillery project. It's part of a $200 million development that will include an events center, lodge, restaurants, and other attractions. It's on the site of a former golf course overlooking Lake Cumberland near Somerset in Pulaski County. Horse Soldier co-founder Scott Neal told us on our recent Happy Hour live webcast what made that golf course perfect for their project.
We wanted to find an area in Kentucky that there wasn't a lot of bourbon distilleries. And we were approached by this small town called Somerset, Kentucky, right on Lake Cumberland. There's no other distilleries around it. And it was such a beautiful small town. And the reason we chose it is I'd rather be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond.
The groundbreaking ceremony came 20 years to the day after Scott Neal and co-founder John Coco were among the 12 U.S. Army Green Berets that entered Afghanistan on horseback in 2001 following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. That unit became known as the Horse Soldiers. It inspired the movie 12 Strong and became the name for their bourbon. By the way, the architects responsible for designing the Horse Soldier development, Rogers, Stirk, Harbour and Partners. That's the firm that designed the Macallan's new distillery in Scotland. On that note, Kentucky's bourbon distillers are launching a new marketing campaign. The Kentucky Distillers Association is basing the campaign around the Kentucky Bourbon brand with the slogan, "The proof is here." While bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States, KDA President Eric Gregory wants to make people think of Kentucky first when they think of bourbon.
Think about it like in the same fashion as the California Raisins campaign or Florida Oranges or Georgia Peaches. We're here just to remind everybody that Kentucky is synonymous with bourbon, and especially bourbon excellence and elegance. And the only place in the world you can come and walk in the footsteps of bourbon legends like, Colonel Bean and even living legends like Bill Samuels down in Maker's Mark. We're having some fun with it as well. We've already put out a couple of social media things on it, and we're going to continue that through the rest of this year and next year, and really hope it entices people to not only try our signature spirit if you haven't before, but also come back to Kentucky and visit us.
I'm just waiting for the TV commercials featuring the claymation animated bourbon barrels now. On a serious note, the bourbon industry accounts for more than 20,000 jobs in Kentucky, and as a sign of just how quickly the bourbon industry is growing, just this month alone, 5 new distilleries have joined the KDA as craft-level members. Let's talk about new whiskeys now, and we'll stay in Kentucky for a moment. Beam Suntory has released the year's 3rd batch of Booker's Bourbon, and this batch honors Bardstown, Kentucky, the bourbon capital of the world. It's where Booker Noe lived for more than 50 years, and his family continues to live there today. As always, Booker's son Fred Noe selected the barrels for this batch. It's bottled at 62.75% ABV and carries a recommended retail price of $89.99 a bottle. I'll have tasting notes soon at the WhiskyCast website. Michter's will release a new batch of its 20-year-old bourbon next month. It's the first release of the 20-year-old since 2019. It'll have a recommended retail price of $750 a bottle. Jephthah Creed Distillery will release its first bottled-in-bond rye bourbon November 11th. It's a 4-year-old bourbon made with Bloody Butcher corn, malted rye, and malted barley. It'll be on sale at the distillery in Shelbyville, along with select retailers in Kentucky and Indiana, as well as online where it's legal, More states are coming next March. And Blue Run Spirits has teamed up with Bourbon Hall of Fame distiller Jim Rutledge again for the new Blue Run High Rye Bourbon. Jim distilled it at Castle and Key. It's the first release Jim has distilled for Blue Run, unlike past releases where he did the consulting work for them. It's a 4-year-old bourbon bottled at 55.5% ABV and will carry a recommended retail price of $89.99 a bottle. I received a sample of it the other day, and I'll have tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. And Hodling & Company is releasing a new expression of its Hirsch selected whiskies. This one is a single-barrel bourbon release that is 6 years old and comes from an undisclosed Kentucky distillery. Only 57 barrels were selected for the release. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $89.99 a bottle. Sensing a theme here. Turning now to Scotland, Tomatin has released the 5th expression in its Warehouse 6 collection. It comes from 2 casks filled on the same day back in September of 1978. The casks were refilled into first fill Oloroso sherry casks after 30 years. Then those casks were blended together 2 years ago. This one won the trophy for Best Single Malt Scotch 26 years and older last week at the International Wine and Spirits Competition Awards. It carries a recommended retail price in the UK of £3,000 a bottle. In addition to the new Orchard House blended malt whiskey that we mentioned on the show last month, Compass Box has a new release in its No Name limited edition series of blended malts. No Name No. 3 wraps up the trilogy, as Compass Box founder John Glazer told us during a Zoom tasting the other day.
Each of them are built around one famous Islay malt whiskey distillery. We started with malt whiskey from the Ardbeg Distillery. We did No Name 2 built around malt whiskey from the Kalila Distillery, and this one's built around malt whiskey from the Lefroy Distillery with a little help from the Bowmore Distillery as well. And this is going to be it. We're not going to try to do No Name any longer. So it's going to be this series of 3, and because it's take it further. What other Islay distilleries can we go? There's a couple. Maybe we're not so interested in them, or maybe we can't get their whiskeys, or can't get them, at an interesting age or in an interesting cask type. So we're just going to draw a line under this one. And 3 is makes a lovely set of anything. 3 is a good number.
No Name No. 3 carries a recommended retail price in the UK of £89.95 a bottle. By the way, if you're a fan of the Compass Box Oak Cross blended malt, keep your eye out for any bottles you might find. It's being retired because the whiskeys used in the blend for Oak Cross are no longer available. Nicknane Distillery is launching a new annual series of single malts curated by members of the distillery team. The Quiet Rebels series debuts with a whiskey named Annabelle for founder Annabelle Thomas. She picked a blend of ex-bourbon and Tokai wine barrels for the debut release. It'll be available in the UK and select European countries for around £66 a bottle. Moving on now, Westward Whiskey in Portland is out with its annual benefit barrel release. This year's edition will focus on homelessness and food insecurity, with 100% of the proceeds going to charities in Oregon and California. It's a blend of 2 single barrels selected by lead distiller Miles Monroe and will sell for $99.99 a bottle. Westward's previous benefit barrels have helped raise more than $20,000 for charity. And on a similar note, 9 U.S. distilleries have teamed up to create the Good Deeds malt whiskey. Headframe Spirits founder John McKee came up with the idea. His colleagues at Balcones, Fuse Spirits, Santa Fe Spirits, 888 Distillers, Bentley Heritage Estate Distillery, State Line Distilling, Sonoma Distilling Company, and Thornton Distilling all donated barrels for the blend. 1,000 bottles are available through sealbox.com, with the proceeds going to benefit Step Up. That's the American Craft Spirits Association's Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. From Canada, Canadian Club is releasing its annual Chronicles whiskey. This year's edition is 44 years old, and it's the oldest age statement Canadian whiskey on record. It is selling in Canada now for around $330 Canadian a bottle, and will be available in the U.S. in limited amounts. No word yet on pricing in the U.S. Corby's Dr. Don Livermore has been busy. He's created a new Lot 40 peated quarter cask rye whiskey, bottled at cask strength, along with a new Pike Creek 22-year-old whiskey finished in PX sherry casks. Both will be available soon in Canada. And there's also a special project out now that's close to Don's love of blending. The J.P. Weiser's Blend Your Own Whiskey Kit comes with 5 different component whiskeys, a beaker, a blending cylinder, and an empty bottle to store your blend, along with Dr. Don's Master Blending Guide. It's available through the LCBO in Ontario and at the J.P. Weiser's Experience at the Hiram Walker Distillery in Windsor, Ontario. Sounds like a good holiday gift idea to me. I mentioned the International Wine and Spirits Competition Awards a couple of minutes ago. Other winners announced last Thursday night in Edinburgh, Scotland. Cavalan's Podium Single Malt from Taiwan won the Worldwide Whiskey Trophy. Speyburn 15 won the Single Malt Scotch 15 Years and Younger Trophy. Bunnahabhain 25 Small Batch won the trophy for Single Malt Scotches 16 to 25 years old. And Glenglassaugh Octaves Batch 2 Classic won the trophy for No Age Statement Single Malt Scotches. Matisse, 21 years old, won the Blended Scotch Whiskey Trophy, while Redemption Barrel Proof High Rye Bourbon won the U.S. Whiskey Trophy. Finally, Millie Milliken was named the Spirits Communicator of the Year. Congratulations. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. The Spirit of Toronto Festival's Warehouse series of virtual tastings continues this week with Dr. Don Livermore of Hiram Walker Distillery on Friday night, Glen Murray on Saturday, and Daft Mill Distillery on Sunday. Tickets are still available for Big Smoke Meets Whiskey Fest on Saturday in Hollywood, Florida, along with the Indie Spirits Expo November 1st in Chicago. The Spirit of Speyside Festival is November 3rd through the 8th in Scotland, and the Whiskey X wraps up for the year on November 4th in Austin, Texas. The Virginia Bourbon Invitational is on the 6th in Virginia Beach, and our friends at Catoctin Creek are hosting the Warrior Spirit Benefit for the Brave Dinner that same night in Purcellville, Virginia. The 6th is also the Falkirk Whiskey Social in Falkirk, Scotland. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details. And please drink responsibly.
It's been 175 years and Dewar's continues to stay curious. We're proud to announce the newest addition to the innovative Dewar's 8-year cask finish series of Scotch whiskey, Dewar's Japanese Smooth. Brought to life by our award-winning master blender, Stephanie McLeod, Japanese Smooth is a perfectly balanced 8-year-old Scotch whiskey that puts a pioneering and innovative focus on our aging process. After 8 years in Scotland, we blend, age again, then finish this whiskey in casks made from 200-year-old Mizunara oak trees. Rare, sure, but worth it. The Mizunara oak perfectly complements the tasty notes with Dewar's Scotch whiskey. Japanese Smooth is loaded with Dewar's signature honey and floral notes, with the Japanese Mizunara oak adding exotic sweet and spicy flavors. Curious? Try this one in a perfect Japanese highball or on the rocks.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Bourbon and the Classic Malts lineup. When you think of Northern California, you are more likely to think first of wines. But there have been whiskeys distilled in California for many years now, starting with some of the early pioneers in craft distilling like St. George Spirits, Anchor Distilling, and Charbet. 8 years ago, Derrick Benham added a distillery to his growing Purple Brands wine business in Sonoma County. Redwood Empire attracted interest from within the wine community. Jeff Duckhorn signed on early and eventually became master distiller, while Lauren Patz recently left nearby Spirit Works Distillery to become Redwood's head distiller. Both have longtime family connections in the Sonoma County wine industry, and they have just released their first bottled-in-bond bourbon and rye whiskies. Jeff, Lauren, and Redwood Empire CEO Aaron Webb joined me on a Zoom call the other day. First of all, let's talk about making whiskey in wine country, because Sonoma County is known more for wine than whiskey. I know our pal Adam Spiegel runs Sonoma Distilling Company over in that neck of the woods, but tell me about Redwood Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits for us is making whiskey in wine country is there's not a whole lot of preconceived notions about what we can and can't do. So that does give us a fair amount of freedom and really getting to explore and do what we want to do. And there are a lot of tenets in place, federally where we're pretty well regulated on what we can't do. We can only go into new wood and all that good jazz, and there's age requirements, and that's great. But that does give us a fair amount of latitude, which is really fun for us. And so we're not being told by legacy of the company or whatnot that we have to produce bourbon in this style because it's been done that way for 100 years. For Lauren and myself, that gives us a lot of freedom. And like, what thing is cooler for makers than to have this freedom to really explore and define what we want to do. And so I think for us, like we talked about mash bills earlier, for me, that's a big thing. I love having different mash bills to play on later in time, because unlike wine where you can make a Cabernet and you can make a Merlot, and then you get to the time of bottling and you can take 10% of that Merlot and blend it in that Cab, and oh great, you still have Cab. We can't do that. We can't take 10% rye whiskey a month before bottling and blend it into our bourbon. That does not work. That becomes a whiskey. So our decisions are all made on day one when we're making our beer, when we're mashing. And so you have to be very thoughtful about that, but that also gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom because it's 51%. So cool. We do some really fun things. What do we, Lauren? I threw the gauntlet to Lauren next month to do some different mash bills, and we're bringing in some triticale.
Yeah, some triticale.
We're doing some really high wheat rye. Yeah. And we're going to try some different things, which I'm just so excited to see how those develop in barrel. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it for us. It's just having a little bit more freedom to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And the wine business side of this really gave us freedom to let that run. We're not just a startup with a small, distillery where they might have a small startup may have other requirements and goals and objectives and have pressures to launch a product, 2 or 3 years into the game. We have other brands on the wine side that we're working on and focused on. I felt like in the early years, every time I walked back here, Jeff was doing something new and different, which was terrific. And I was just trying to block, keep people out of the way and from trying to go sell it early.
Which was amazing. I mean, the lack of pressure early on to get product to market is so important for a distillery and so rare to have that luxury. And for us to have that luxury of, no, we want to wait till 5 years on our bottle and bond. Like, nobody gets to do that. Yeah. And we got to do that because the winery was paying the bills and doing a great job, and Aaron was blocking for us. And that's awesome. And so it allows for everybody to enjoy a better product at the end of the day. Yep.
And 2 notes from a purely production side of it. One is because the wine industry is so prevalent here, we have access to an incredible amount of cooperages, an incredible amount of tank fabricators. And so the actual equipment and raw materials and things like that we use in the distillery, we have much more ready access to than a lot of other parts of the country. And second of all, because our climate is so different from some of those more traditional areas that whiskey is being made, I think you can really taste the difference in that finished product. And so it really does have this sense of place when you're drinking it.
Lauren, you had some really cool whiskeys at Spirit Works before you joined Redwood Empire. What attracted you to Redwood Empire, and what do you bring in that creativity from Spirit Works to Redwood Empire?
Great question.
Great question.
What's cool is, I knew Jeff from the very beginning of when they were getting started up here in Grayton, which is maybe 10 minutes away from Sebastopol, which is where Spirit Works Distillery is. So we had a lot of dialogue and back and forth. So, I was obviously familiar with the brand, familiar with the team, and I like this kind of ambition for making whiskeys accessible to consumers in a lot of different ways. And so I was really looking forward to being a part of a team that was focused on that kind of expansive, really, dreaming super, super large and things like that on a smaller scale, which is kind of what things were going like at Spirit Works. It was really fun because we made all different types of whiskeys. I worked a lot with spelt and triticale and rye. And so having had that opportunity and that experience to work with such a wide range of whiskeys, because they do have a tasting room. And so it's easier for us to kind of move through product in a different way instead of having to have steady core products always going out into market. That was really a lot of education that I get to bring here. And just like Jeff said, in terms of the mash bill development that we do in-house, we did some peated bourbon and smoked bourbon and some other fun stuff here. I love recipe development. I'm also a huge fan of gin, so just kind of using all of that here, I think it's really translatable.
Lauren keeps us honest because she comes from a true craft background. So she's always going to fall back on protect the spirit, protect the integrity, protect the product. And that's something that as we grow, I believe is so important. And so it's great to have a colleague in that's always going to be, that's always her first thought is let's protect the spirit.
Yeah.
And so that's where that really comes in handy.
Is there a Redwood Empire house style yet? Or are you still trying to work on that with all these different mash bills you're testing out and working with?
I think that is our style.
Yeah.
I think our style is to have these kind of variations for each mash bill and each distillation, and then really bring and tie all that together during blending. So we did, Jeff and I spent a significant amount of time on putting together the blend for the Bottled and Bond and the Rocket Top Rye. And that's really where the fun and where it all kind of comes together for sure. When we're putting together, each individual barrel is not only different because it was in a different barrel or a different placement within the rick house, but it's different because some of the actual grain is going to be different in each one of those.
This isn't unusual even to traditional whiskey producers to have an array of barrel types and locations that they utilize to get their house style. Our biggest priority was to unquestionably deliver a world-class product. And we took a lot of steps to make sure we were able to do that. So that, there are a lot of distilleries out there, a lot of smaller ones that have to step into it earlier or have to make different trade-offs for different reasons. We really want to make sure we did not have to do that. And I think that it's worked out really nicely with these products.
Yeah. And that's where having a little bit of accounting background also helps, because I have some very complicated spreadsheets that are driving our core brands, where I think it is important to also be consistent, especially when you're offering a product throughout the year. And so that's something that we strive for as well. We want to be consistently delicious. We want to, number one, we better be delicious. But it's also, I think, important to also offer something that somebody's going to come to know, like, wow, Redwood, I can pick that up. And it's going to have, to your point, there's a house style there. It's about balance. It's about complexity. And those are the things we really want to deliver on.
You still are sourcing some whiskey from other distilleries.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
absolutely.
You're transparent about that. But this Bottled and Bond release that you have now, these are your first in-house whiskeys. Is that fair to say that it's all from your place?
Correct.
100%.
All products, though, have all of these. The three base mainline products have a percentage of our whiskey in it. So we felt that was very important from the jump, and somewhere between 10 and 30%, depending on the product and the year we're talking about. But we'll gradually increase that over time, and it's pretty normal to do. And those products actually, I think, I can't speak for the distillers. I think they have a large influence on the flavor profile in those products. So, and something somebody else can't duplicate at all. It's not just a one purchased lot of whiskey that we've bottled up and sold.
Yeah.
But when I ask that, I'm saying it because this is the first chance for those of us out in the world to taste what you're making in Sonoma County and to see what you're doing on your own.
Correct, 100%.
Right.
So that's why we're really open to feedback and interested to hear what your thoughts are.
As long as they're positive.
Yeah, only the good stuff.
We'll talk about that later, but
it is an interesting point in a distillery when you get to this place where you've released something that's 100% yours, because there is no hiding. There is no blending away what may or may not have been a flaw or something you were still figuring out back 5 years ago, right? And so there is a bit of vulnerability, some nakedness there, and you just lay that out there and you say, this is who we were, this is who we are, and enjoy it or don't, but we're very proud of it.
Yeah.
And that's something very cool about that from our standpoint of like, it's just like, you're just laying it out there.
So, Jeff, what was the biggest mistake you guys made in that first 6 years? What did you learn from?
Oh, we made a lot. I had the biggest one.
I wonder what you're going to pick.
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. We probably should have made a little more bourbon in the first year. We really focused a lot on rye because that's what I wanted to make, and that was kind of where we had some plans that were put in place. That rye was something we were going to make a lot of. So probably a little more bourbon. Honestly, I don't know. I don't look back a lot. I mean, I think that's the nice thing about having this freedom to do what we do. I haven't had a whole lot of correction along the way because, again, our wine business has been doing very well for us, and I've had a lot of autonomy to make mistakes and learn from them, but not really dwell on them. And so, yeah, I maybe wish we would have made a little more of this or that along the way, or maybe gone to older aged wood. I think that's something that I think we probably should have done a little bit earlier, gone to 36-month seasoned oak earlier. We did that a couple years into our program. And I think that's made a phenomenal difference. And I probably would have done that sooner if I'd known. But, you know, all in all, I don't look back a lot. I mean, there's so much to look forward to that I just chalk that up to learning and we move forward.
When do you think you might have a tasting room? I know small distilleries depend on them, and a lot of wineries out in Sonoma County have tasting rooms. When do you think you might have one?
Aaron?
Yeah. Aaron, let us know.
As soon as we can identify the right property and get it going. So we're actively pursuing that today. And as soon as we can put something in place, we will do it. We will probably have a tasting room before we have a new expanded distillery. It's easier to start the tasting room than it is to start up that new still. So
it's a little trickier for spirits out here than it is for wine. You can have satellite tasting rooms pretty much all day long for wine. For spirits, you have to be contiguous to your distilling space. So that would have to be really right where we're at now. And we're a little off the beaten track right now. So it just hasn't really made sense for us up until now, but it's coming. It's something it's coming soon.
And we have a private one currently. It's just, it can't be open to the public.
One of the things we have to look at in Northern California is the environment and the drought and water issues and wildfires and all that, that Sonoma County's been plagued with over the last few years. How close have you guys come to having to pack up the inventory and get out of Dodge because of wildfires?
Last year, we were one zone away from emergency evacuation, and zones, I think, are about, 2 to 4 miles.
You could see smoke from here.
And that was, it was pretty intense. But we rallied through that. 3 years ago, we had pretty intense flooding that came up to the door of our distillery. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these things happen, you know, it's just, but we've been very fortunate so far, and you have to, again, look forward and not back and just keep rolling.
And it's a shame you can't save some of that water from the flooding for when the drought hits, right?
Yeah, it'd be nice. We're supposed to get a pretty significant rain event starting next Wednesday, so we're very excited about that.
How do you cope with potential for water shortages and water rationing and things like that, especially since distilleries use a lot of water?
We do use a lot of water. Our still is very water conscious. We're doing single pass distillation because it's a continuous column, so that saves us a lot on water. We're cooling via glycol in a closed loop system, so we're not wasting any water for cooling. And so those two things have a big impact on us. We're capturing back as much of our backset as we can and using it in future mashes. So we really try to do our best in the areas we can to conserve water. That being said, there's always water usage, just like in a brewery. There's a lot of water that's required. So we do the best that we can. We have monitoring stations throughout the winery and distillery to monitor our water usage, and we're very aware of that. We have a wastewater pond that we manage very closely to make sure that we're within local tolerances. And I think all in all, we do a pretty darn good job of that.
Let's wrap it up with talking about the environmental focus and your Trees for the Future project and the partnership there. Tell me about that project.
Yeah, I mean, Trees for the Future, obviously, if your brand's Redwood Empire, it's important to talk about trees. And for us locally here, the trees, it is a thing. I mean, 20 minutes from the distillery, there's a beautiful old growth redwood forest, Armstrong Woods. We've all been there. It's my wife's probably favorite place on the planet to go. It's beautiful. So we love our trees. And so we want to really talk about those and pay homage to them and give back. And so that's part of Trees for the Future. For every bottle sold, a tree is planted. It's on our back label. That's something we really take to heart. We're very proud of. And then we're also continuing to look at and do more local initiatives where we can do that locally and environments where we're selling. And so we have some local initiatives here where we're giving back from the fires and looking at planting locally to reforest and before the rains come and we have a lot of flooding, and volunteering where we can there, and then also in just other parts of the U.S. as well. So it's something that we really take to heart and want to put a lot of effort behind.
On the winery side, we're a certified sustainable winery and also take many steps on that front as well. So it's a thing that we think about culturally from, for the entire company. It's not just necessarily window dressing for the whiskey side. It's how we have to approach the whole business.
Just facetiously, have you guys thought about taking, say, a downed redwood and trying to mature some whiskey in it and make it into a barrel?
I get asked that a lot, including by our owner for the first couple of years. And everything I read was that redwood is just not a great medium for aging whiskey, that there's just some flavors that are not going to be pleasant. It was used historically for wine storage, but it was pretty well seasoned by that point and not really going to, it's not going to impart any flavor. So for me, it's back to the spirit. Unless it's going to make the spirit better, I don't really want to do it.
It would be for show. And we've looked at different redwood tanks for blending and things like that, but haven't done that yet.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
I think there's some potential for maybe some finishing, brief finishing.
Okay.
I'm just saying, you don't know until you try it. Maybe give it a chance.
You have it on record.
Right.
Or at the very least, make some barrel heads out of redwood to sell in your gift shop when you open one up.
Yeah, something.
Down fallen redwoods.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, fallen redwoods. Yeah, we're not going to go cut one down.
No.
That connection with redwoods is part of the naming for the first Redwood Empire bottled and bond whiskies. Rocket Top Straight Rye is named for a 365-foot-tall coastal redwood tree in the Humboldt Redwoods State Park. And Grizzly Beast Straight Bourbon is named for Yosemite's Grizzly Giant Sequoia and the Matoli Beast Coastal Redwood in Humboldt Redwoods. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, and it's brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard from Scotland. Whether it's the classic Oban 14-year-old, the 18-year-old, Oban Little Bay, or the Distillers edition, every drop comes from the coastal town of Oban and a distillery just 206 steps away from the sea. It's one of Scotland's smallest distilleries, with just 7 people who make whiskey the same way their predecessors have since 1794. Find out more at obanwhiskey.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, and I am starting to work my way slowly back into tasting. as I continue to recover from my concussion. I did receive samples of both of the Redwood Empire bottled and bond whiskies. Let's start off with the Grizzly Beast Bourbon. It's a 4-grain bourbon with a touch of wheat, just 4% of the mash bill, along with corn, rye, and malted barley. The nose has touches of raspberry jam, cinnamon, walnuts, molasses, and a hint of cocoa. The taste has a nice spicy character, along with touches of orange peel, honey, vanilla, and caramel that give it a nice balance. The finish is long and gentle. I'm scoring the Redwood Empire Grizzly Beast Bottled in Bond Bourbon a 92. The Rocket Top Rye also has a touch of wheat, 6% of the mash bill, along with 87% rye and 7% malted barley. The nose is dry, with touches of clove, sandalwood, garden herbs, dried grass, and a hint of brown sugar. The taste has plenty of baking spices, led by clove and black pepper, along with a hint of coffee beans, barley sugar, and straw. The finish is long with lingering spices, a nice maltiness, and a hint of coffee beans. I'm scoring Redwood Empire's Rocket Top Bottled in Bond Rye a 93. And finally, I mentioned the Good Deeds malt whiskey during the news. It's a blended malt with whiskeys from 9 U.S. craft distilleries, bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is malty with touches of honey, vanilla, straw, and a hint of butterscotch. The taste, it's nice and spicy, a nice balance of chili powder and black pepper that fade to reveal hints of cedar, honey, barley sugar, and a hint of licorice. Those flavors carry over into the long and well-balanced finish. I love collaborations like this one. I'm scoring the Good Deeds Malt Whiskey a 91. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,200 different whiskeys at whiskycast.com. This week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore Farm and Waterfront Distillery. And they're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. If you buy bottles at your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each one. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word. Please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. I hate to see tweets like this one from Anthony Italia 13 the other day. Mark paid an unbelievable $300 for a Jack Daniel's 10-year-old. Although I love Jack Daniel's, I think this is slightly overpriced, and I'm being diplomatic about it. I was told it's limited edition, but it's still very expensive to the average drinker. Yeah, no kidding, Anthony. That is more than 4 times the recommended retail price of $70 a bottle that Jack Daniel's set for the 10-year-old back in August. After I tweeted that to him, the official Jack Daniel's Twitter account responded with this: "Yes, we have a suggested price, but stores set their own pricing." I usually mention it about this time every year, since this is the season when we see all sorts of limited edition releases come out. And yes, I am referring especially to the Pappy Van Winkle whiskies. In the U.S., and this may be the case in other countries, I'm not quite sure, manufacturers of consumer goods are only allowed to recommend a retail price for their products. Retailers are free to set their own prices at whatever they think they can get away with. That's why you see dealer markups on cars and things like that. And it's why you see retailers marking up even the base-level Van Winkle whiskeys that carry a recommended retail price of around $70 a bottle to 10 times that, as a couple of liquor stores in my area have done. And, by the way, none of that extra money goes back to the people who actually made the whiskey. It stays in the pockets of the store owner. When I mention new releases, I try to include the recommended retail price when it's available. But here's a pro tip to keep in mind. If you visit the websites for many brands, you might see a section labeled Press or Media, where they archive the news releases announcing new expressions. If you think a retailer is trying to gouge you on prices, take a look at the brand's website to see if there is a news release announcing that whiskey and what the official recommended retail price is. You can also find a lot of those news releases at whiskyintelligence.com too. And that way you can see just how much they are trying to mark up a price and whether it's worth shopping around for a better deal. It usually is. Here's a well-timed email from Steve Duggins in Virginia. And Steve, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Howdy, Mark. First, let me say thank you for doing what you do. By far, WhiskyCast is the best podcast on the planet. I have been an avid listener for the last 7 to 9 years. I lost count on account of COVID. I was wondering whatever happened with the Filibuster brand. If I remember correctly, in your last report, the owner was in trouble for environmental reasons. Is Filibuster still in operation? Your loyal fan, Steve. And P.S. I hope the concussion recovery is progressing well. Well, thanks for that, Steve. And here is why your email is very well timed. As we reported back in January, Filibuster Distillery and owner Sid Dilawri were indicted by a Virginia grand jury on 115 separate charges of violating state environmental laws. The state is accusing Filibuster of illegally dumping distillery waste into a creek near the distillery between November of 2018 and last September. And yes, the distillery is still in operation. Here's why that email is well timed, Steve. There is a court hearing scheduled for next Wednesday in the case, and it appears that a plea agreement may have been reached that could see Dilawri and the distillery plead guilty to at least some of the charges. Neither Dilawri nor the State Attorney General's office has been willing to comment on terms of that plea agreement, but we'll keep an eye on what happens next Wednesday in Shenandoah County, Virginia. Thanks again, Steve. And if there is something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers from all over the world, you can always find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. I want to start this by going back to one of the seminal events in recent wine history, the Paris wine tasting of 1976. It's also known as the Judgment of Paris. Back in those days, California wines were regarded as vastly inferior to those of France. That was until May 24, 1976, when wine merchants Stephen Spurrier and Patricia Gallagher set up a blind tasting in Paris. French judges tasted Bordeaux against California Cabernet Sauvignons and French Burgundies against California Chardonnays. When the results came in, California wines won both categories over their French counterparts. And that one tasting changed the wine world as we know it to this day. Single malt whiskeys are now being produced all over the world, but let me go back to our final story in the news segment earlier in this episode on the results of this year's International Wine and Spirits Competition. You see, they presented trophies in 4 different categories for single malt scotches, but just one for all American whiskeys combined, and one for so-called worldwide whiskeys of all types from other countries. Now, one could make the argument that that reflects Scotland's unique history in whiskey. Or one could argue the opposite point, that times have changed and doing it the way they have been reflects a prejudice in favor of Scotch whiskies that needs to be corrected. As one of the leaders of the American single malt community, you can probably guess which side Westland Distilleries' Matt Hoffman takes.
American single malt, along with several other countries, is in this moment where we are at that defining place that New World wine was or Californian wine was 50 years ago. We're at this point now where the category is emerging. It's writing its own history. The styles are evolving, and there's many different sub-styles to the point where I would say there aren't even any sub-styles concretely yet within American single malt. But that's what makes it so interesting. It's alive. It's dynamic.
So 45 years after the Judgment of Paris, and with thousands more judges, it is time for the Judgment of Westland. Earlier this month at the Whiskey Show in London, 3 months of blind tastings began as attendees tasted 4 different single malts. 1 American, presumably Westland, 1 Scotch, and 2 from other countries. Not trying to decide which one is the best, but, as Westland's Steve Hawley explained during a Zoom blind tasting with whiskey writers the other night, judging each one on its own merits.
We take a lot of inspiration not only from the Judgment of Paris, but also the Japanese whiskey industry, which was really the first to prove the great single malt could be made outside of Scotland. And then, all the way up until today when there's great single malt being made all over the world. It's no longer the domain of Scotland alone. So again, we still get a few raised eyebrows and a few kind of pessimistic looks. So we thought, why not recreate something similar and go with the Judgment of Westland?
The Judgment of Westland tastings will continue through December at whiskey events around the world, as well as during tastings with whiskey clubs and at retailers. The goal is to have at least 2,500 people complete the blind tastings before the final results are announced. For the record, I sat in on the Zoom tasting, but the combination of my concussion recovery and a rare delivery screw-up by the whiskey ferries at FedEx meant that my samples didn't arrive in time, so I had to watch and listen. I'll be doing the Judgment of Westland tasting for myself soon. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, a rare style of Irish whiskey with a creative twist. A unique triple-distilled blend of single pot still and single malt premium Irish whiskies. Writer's Tears Copper Pot. Do you dare to be creative?
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to November 12th, 2005. That's right, we're getting ready to celebrate another anniversary. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Just like the end of this WhiskyCast episode, Dewar's Scotch whiskey always makes for a smooth finish. Like our newly released Dewar's Japanese Smooth, aged for 8 years in Scotland, blended then aged again before being finished for up to 6 months in Mizunara oak casks made from 200-year-old Japanese water oak trees. These unique casks layer distinct dry and spicy flavors to the whiskey, with aromas reminiscent of sandalwood and incense. Keep an eye out for a bottle of Dewar's Japanese Smooth at a store near you.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.